So I'm now delighted to hand over to Sue Rigby, who will be hosting our panel this morning. Professor Rigby commenced her role as Principal and Vice Chancellor of Edinburgh Napier University in January 2025, after 7 years of Vice Chancellor at Bath Spa University. So Sue, I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to this session. I was really intrigued by the idea that we would get together and think about practical solutions, because obviously as a university academic that's not my bag. But actually running Edinburgh Napier is much more our bag. We're the university that's delighted to sponsor and support BEST, and some of our best research, sorry, pun was intended there, if you could laugh as if it had been funny I would be grateful. It is done around the built environment and how to move towards a lower zero carbon future, particularly through laminated timber and timber buildings. We're really at the end of the road now until scale up happens, because we have all the technologies, they're proven to work at an industrial scale. We can build houses entirely made of timber, indeed of local timber that's effectively raised and born and bred in Scotland. And we can deliver those houses, or rather BEST can. The problem is that there's no point doing that 2 or 3 times. We need to do it thousands of times to make a difference. So this is a panel of experts, and in a moment I'll introduce them, with very different perspectives on how to move towards that scale up and what the barriers to that might be and what the opportunities are. Broadly, I think in your earlier session, what you've identified is that the 3 big barriers are money, the creation of a regulatory environment that supports and indeed necessitates the move towards scale up, and just the opportunities to meet and learn the techniques and the opportunities that would follow from that. And so that's very much what my experts are going to talk through. I was reading a Royal Geographical Society report published in 2024 that was talking about how to move towards scaled low-carbon buildings. And more or less everything they said was legislate. Legislate for low or zero-carbon buildings through the planning process, incorporate embodied carbon into building regulations, introduce a demolition fund, effectively apply PAS 2080 and make that mandatory, and move from a lowest cost approval to lowest carbon approval. Again, I thought that was great until I thought, yes, but how do you do that if you actually run a contracting company and you build stuff? And at that point, it feels like the cost will be enough to turn you into a part-time gardener. So I suspect that comes to the intersection of what in the abstract looks like a straightforward process and what in the practice is actually the key topic of the times. Can't think of anybody better to address that through a pair of very different lenses than my speakers. So I'm just going to say their names and then I'm going to sit down and let them tell you much more about who they are. But we have Professor Judith Phillips, who's been Research Director for the UKRI Healthy Ageing Challenge and was a senior member of the Older People's Housing Task Force in England. So very much from a perspective of what our ageing demographic requires in terms of building growth. And then Dr. Roddy Yarr, who's the Director of Sustainability at the University of Glasgow and works with the Scottish Parliament at national level to think about sustainability. So if you could welcome them with me, thank you very much.
Shall I kick off?
Yeah, so Judith, would you like to just introduce yourself to the audience, and then we could have Roddy do the same, and then we'll go through cost regulation and how we all meet up to learn how to do this.
Okay, I'm Judith Phillips. I'm Professor of Social and Environmental Gerontology at the University of Stirling. My particular interests are quite wide around the ageing population, but I'm very interested as a geographer in looking at urban design, housing for older people, and how we scale up our housing offerings, and how we build the environment to be sustainable as well, and how we look at that across the life course. So it's not just about older people, it's about how we sustain age throughout the life course and build homes for healthy physical and cognitive ageing.
Thank you, Judith. Roddy.
Hi, good morning. I'm Roddy Yarr. As Sue said, I've worked at the University of Glasgow. My job is to deliver the university's operational sustainability objectives. So it's very much focused around finding solutions and delivering those solutions. Very much around, particularly now, delivery. So I've been there 2 years, and what can I say in a short précis of what I do and what the team does. We work within a financial envelope, so we have funding available to us to deliver the objectives, which is really positive, and feel very lucky to have that. We work within the regulations of not only the university, but of course national policy, and that's UK and Scottish and local authority guidance, etc. So those two things have to meld together, but really the university, if I can maybe just summarise, because it might resonate with you as an audience, we're in the same boat, I think, all together as a collective group, trying to find solutions that really work, and with the focus on scale. So our footprint at the university is significant. Universities, large research-intensive universities, whose job it is to research and teach, and provide skills and enable innovation and economic development at the same time, really do have to focus on the cost of energy, the cost of resources, at the same time as reducing the carbon footprint of those resources. So really challenging environment to work within. And all of that has to be done at speed and at scale. So my reflection would be, I'm happy to take questions on kind of what we're doing, but I think we all need to think about a much more regional approach to this aspect, particularly around operational sustainability and scale, because we can't do it on our own, and we've been quite open and honest about that as a university. We have to, and we want to, and we already are doing a lot with our regional and local partners, and that will continue to be the case. And that's not telling you, you know that, but I think we're absolutely in the middle of that kind of paradigm and that dynamic at the moment. And it's fascinating, but it's also really challenging. So I'm looking forward to perhaps discussing a bit more about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Roddy. I mean, I was really fascinated when we were talking a few minutes ago, Judith, about your perspective on building and move to net zero from a perspective of an ageing population. Will you unpack for us a bit how you meld those two and what the findings were of the work that you've done?
Well, I think the two things go together, age and environmental sustainability and scalability. And I think one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of housing for older people, or better housing as we age, is very much captured by a number of projects that we've been doing. I'd just like to highlight one project in particular, which was designing homes for healthy cognitive ageing. And that was looking, it was part of the Healthy Ageing Challenge, and it was a mission-driven focus. So, as Sue mentioned, I was the research director for the UKRI Healthy Ageing Challenge, and this project was funded at Stirling, and what it was doing was really, as part of the challenge, coming from a mission-driven approach. So it wasn't just looking at ageing, but also the whole system, the whole framework and ecosystem around ageing, particularly the environment, and how we designed something for healthy cognitive ageing, because it's something that's often not considered alongside the environmental sustainability, is how do we sustain ourselves and how do we use the environment to support ourselves as we age from birth onwards. But we were particularly looking at cognitive ageing in later life and midlife. And I think one of the key things here in terms of scaling up both environmental and ageing solutions is really to have this mission-driven approach where all the stakeholders have the same outcome, the same agenda, and really share those goals, and also co-design with people on the ground. And I think this is absolutely critical with housing professionals, designers, builders, as well as older people sitting around the table and really discussing what is necessary, not just for ageing, but net zero as well, and to have those conversations and then as part of the research, and then being able to design a prototype for healthy ageing. And that has been a good prototype, which is then being scaled up through City Region deal of the Stirling Clackmannanshire City Region deal. So it's got a test bed in which it can, the prototype can be scaled up, and we can look at the whole range of things, the whole system, the ecosystem, not just ageing or the human dimensions, but also the environmental dimension.
That's absolutely fascinating. I mean, in essence, what did that prototype comprise, and what elements would be relevant to the construction industry?
Well, I think the methodology was very interesting. As I mentioned, it was a whole variety of methods we used. One of them, we did walkthroughs with VR with people and carers, older people and carers living with somebody with a dementia, and people who had mild cognitive impairments as well. And the two people who actually did the research sat in the audience. What we did was look at what people's views are and what they needed as they got older. And this is something I think is quite commonly used in the construction industry. And so there's methodologies that can be translated across sectors here. But also, we really worked quite closely with professionals, listening to them, and what they wanted. We had a serious game which was part of the methodology, which got everyone around the table to really discuss their views on what they thought were part of not just the home but the community, because the ecosystem is not just the house build but also the community, and what would make good age-friendly, dementia supportive, culturally sensitive environments is really important, not just the environment, the built environment and the natural environment as well. So all these discussions were happening together with older people, with researchers, in a kind of tripartite co-design approach. What we came out with was not specific detail of design, but more design principles, which can then be used across the sector, not just the construction sector, but the whole sector that's involved in that ecosystem.
And 2 or 3 of those principles would be, concrete examples?
Things like how do you design for somebody who's got cognitive impairments? So, for example, where things should be positioned in the house, the colour schemes, etc. So real tangible examples. And these are readily available on the web through the website. If you look at the Stirling website in our Dementia Centre, but also in guides and tools that have come out from the research that can be easily used.
So moving on to those kind of 3 barriers or opportunities, if we looked in a reverse lens, either from that perspective of a major university with a civic imprint looking for regional changes to energy, or the Clackmannanshire example of thinking about healthy ageing and net zero, what are the barriers to those things scaling? And if we took the first one, is it cost, effectively, at the moment, that would stop those expansions? And what would enable that?
I wouldn't put the whole onus on cost. I think there are a number of factors. I'll mention 3 factors. One is ageism. I think people think, and if you look at the schemes that are already in place around the country, particularly south of the border, they are very small pilot schemes where the construction industry has been building pilots looking at specific housing for older people. It doesn't look good value for money, not for builders, developers, or older people themselves. And so actually, we need to look at that whole piece, because a lot of ideas out there really are stereotypical. And Tara mentioned something earlier on, they were involving older people, and of course they wanted bungalows. No, that's not necessarily right. That's stereotyping. In fact, you shouldn't have bungalows. You need physical activity of walking up the stairs. And I think we all, from whatever sector we're in, have these stereotypes about what older people want. And I think things aren't scaling up because we're not involving older people enough in the actual design of what they want. And older people's views are very diverse, of course. So, it's actually listening to people very closely to really get that kind of confidence and demand from older consumers to then push the market to scale up in these small constructions.
Yeah, that makes a huge amount of sense. So is scale up also the solution at a regional energy scale? I know that for the University of Strathclyde, you developed a major kind of district heating solution, didn't you? Is scale up the solution to cost?
It depends. So I think scale is unlocked by a cost model that works for the off-takers of an energy system. It has to have the right OPEX, operating cost model. So the capital is one thing, but the operational cost is a significant burden. And that's what's burdening us all, I think, if we run large estates, is the operating cost of that energy supply. So lots of people's fitting direct wire PV to reduce the cost of retail power to the organisation. And as we decarbonise heat, the cost of that electricity to do that is, of course, a factor, quite a major factor. But what I see, in the universities, we're able to solve that cost dilemma to a certain degree. Investing in demand reduction is a big part of what we're doing and going to be doing, so we don't need as much energy within the buildings that we operate. We have 366 heated buildings, 6 campuses, 500,000 square metres of GIA. So it's a significant user of resources, one of which is energy. So we have to get the cost model correct, and that's the supply side, and it's also the demand side, reducing the demand, but using energy in a way that works for us, just to keep the lights on costs X million per annum for the university. That's taking away from the ability to do research at Napier or Stirling, or indeed on teaching at Glasgow or other universities. So these are significant burdens, and I think we need to come round to a kind of a collective ambition to be much more active in the space, to identify the solutions around the supply, and then obviously tie those into the best way to provide that energy into where the demand sits at a local level and at a regional level. So there are sort of a micro scale, and then there's the macro scale.
And I mean, for both of you, does that to an extent involve looking out beyond a house or a housing estate? I mean, crudely, do we all need a data centre next door to give us free heat? Or do we all need the natural environment next door to give us a healthy ageing solution? Is it enough to look at one type of purpose, like a housing estate? Or is the solution actually much broader than that? Judith?
I think it's a whole collection of things. I think we need to be thinking much more holistically than we do. We do think in silos a lot of the time. And so I think challenging the whole of design and planning and freeing up planning is going to be really important if we are going to really think about how we sustain our communities. So it's right the way through from looking at the retail offering, right the way through to housing, right the way through to what we need in terms of AI and data and so forth. So I do think it's looking at the whole range and where the energy envelope is within that, and population data. And this is where I think AI can really score, because bringing things together could actually give us a much better picture of what's actually in our locality and what we need to do about it, and bring that system together.
Yeah, so that everything optimises.
Yes.
Roddy?
Yeah, I think adjacency to waste heat resources is you mentioned data centres. Data centres are now providing heat into strategic assets. So yeah, we at the university we've got 11 programmes that we're using to decarbonise the estates that we operate. One of those is a major programme around heat decarbonisation, and we're actually blessed where we are in Glasgow to have access to 4 energy vectors that are available to us that are not gas. We use gas, we rely on gas, but we need to start to decarbonise. So we have adjacency to those energy vectors that we'd very much like to engage the market in, and we're going to be doing that very soon. So it's being much more active. Who can provide solutions? How can we harness those solutions? What's the commercial model? What are the operating costs? What's the capex? What does the actual commercial structure look like? These are the things that we're absolutely deep in the weeds of that, because those are the solutions that then give us the choices to decide what it is we do for the next, generation. These are generational choices we're making here, I think, because they're large-scale infrastructure that actually will help us to decarbonise in an affordable manner that then allows us to have a flat level of energy pricing, because we're in a kind of energy security. The price of that energy fluctuates. We have no control at the moment. We absolutely have to be much more active rather than nascent in this space, and that's what we're doing now. And we see that across lots of different stakeholders in Scotland and in the UK, where the activity is building around this. So I think we're in a good place from that point of view, but we absolutely need to focus on that delivery piece and knock down some of the barriers to that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess what both of you are saying is that we need to move from opportunistic, which is still better than it was, to something more strategic. That would imply planning or other regulatory change. What would the major changes be that would make a difference to both of you? I mean, Roddy, do you want to kick off this time?
So people might not like some of these, but I think we need to be much more regional and be a bit more bold in the regional approach that we have. And I say region because that's scale. And I think we're part of that conversation, but I think we're not active enough in that, and I think we need to come around that, put an arm around that, and try and make that a bit more tangible and seek the solutions. Energy pricing for strategic assets, I think, should be a thing. It already is a thing in the kind of large energy use industries, cement manufacture, for instance. Well, is a university a strategic asset? Is an acute hospital a strategic asset? It is, to a certain degree. Is there a pricing structure that might help a tariff to enable those assets to not be kind of affected so much with retail pricing as they seek to decarbonise? So there's almost a contract put in place where we're trying to get to a place where we need to be more efficient, and carbon is part of that. What measures can we use within our gift to do that? And I think that conversation needs to be a bit more open. And I think there's some real opportunities to that. Direct wire for strategic assets should be a thing that we all focus on, and that builds scale, and it delivers really strong outcomes. It can deliver social outcomes as much as economic outcomes and environmental outcomes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Judith, what's your take?
Well, I think planning does need to change, and I mean there's a lot of minutiae and detail that needs to change in relation to building homes for older people or as we age. But I think just coming back to the point about, and I would say ditto to Roddy's thing about regionalisation, we do need to really get around the table and engage with planners. I think there's a lack of understanding and visibility in the considerations of planners in design, but also in terms of urban space as well as within housing. And I think there's a lot of skills and knowledge that we need as researchers as well to engage with planners. I think there's huge emphasis in universities on producing that next journal article or getting that next grant, rather than having funding to actually look at impact and look at how we work with all the professionals in this ecosystem. I think that's really absolutely critical if our research is going to be scaled up, if we're going to influence planning and influence change across the sectors.
No, that's fascinating. So, I think in essence what you've been saying is that cost is a barrier, but it can be mitigated by sufficient scale and a sufficiently broad, inclusive approach to space that goes beyond the immediate to a more regional, that planning and tariffing and so on will need to come along to help us go from opportunistic to strategic, and that the barriers to all of this are as much that we don't talk to one another, whether that's to the elderly, to the cognitively impaired, to the energy companies, to the universities, to the planners, as it is to not having the solutions to hand. Fair?
Yeah.
Magic. At this point, over to you. We would really welcome your questions. We actually can't see any of you because the lights are so bright, so we might need a bit of help to mitigate that. But peering out, questions for my colleagues. We have questions that you populated before the session. So I can only read on this one. So are there any conflicts between healthy cognitive ageing and sustainable building ambitions?
Well, I think they go side by side, and I think if you look just at one example, air pollution, for example, is a key contributory factor to dementia. So, you know, that's one thing that we need to tackle. And, you know, indoor air environments, outdoor air environments. So I do think they go very much hand in hand, and we haven't been thinking of these things together, and I think we do need to do that. Design is really important for our cognitive health, and so I think it's a great opportunity to work, you know, in this environment where we can look at these issues together.
I think it's a really interesting question that's been asked about across your estate, Roddy. What's the hardest challenge? And I guess that links to another question, which is asking about whether the whole of the estate could be seen as a strategic asset.
The first one, I think behaviour change is a big challenge. We have a student population of 40,000 and a staff population of 10,000 people, so all of whom have a view and an opinion because it's a university. So behaviour change is a big part of it. One of our biggest contributors is our business travel. We're straying away from the built environment here, but you know, part of that is the behaviours that sit around the understanding and the responsibility that I think we all have as individuals and as a collective to come together around some of these issues. What was the second one?
Whether a district heat network could be regarded as a strategic asset.
Well, it is. So at Glasgow, we have a 7-kilometre district heating network. We have 46 megawatts of on-site generation. That network can be used to pass heat through it for others. And I think as a civic university, that's very much part of our ethos. And we deliver high quality teaching and research. So my point about how can we contract around an arrangement that allows us to decarbonise and operate in a much more stable financial environment, this is part of that conversation. So seeing these large pieces of infrastructure, strategic assets, is really important. Lots of people have got these networks across HE, across hospitals, local authorities, private. They all need to be linked up, ideally, in some form, as they've done in the Scandics and Europe for many years. So yeah, I think they are strategic assets. They're investments in the ground, much as the gas network is, or the wires that provide our power. So yeah, they are, and should continue to be so.
One question that really interested me, I guess mainly for Judith, was around how do we scale up that mission-led approach so that it becomes a dominant force and what might be perceived as a nice to have?
I think it comes down to funding and what research councils, what government funds. The Healthy Ageing Challenge was mission-led from the industrial strategy. And so those incentives, they weren't just to the universities and researchers. The Healthy Ageing Challenge had a whole range of initiatives. Actually, one of the biggest initiatives in terms of funding was the Trailblazer initiative. And I have details of all these in some brochures, which was actually working with industry at scale, so looking to scale up, and that was the whole purpose of it. and we all worked from a mission-driven perspective, but that was led through and by UK government through the industrial strategy. So I think there's different levels of really making sure that we take on this mission thinking from researchers right the way through to government to stimulate that kind of thinking.
I was drawn to a question which I think is a fair challenge for all of us working in universities, which you could paraphrase as, how do we generate graduates who become leaders who are useful to the industry and not repressive in terms of being too slow, too like hidebound and too bureaucratic to actually make a difference? I paraphrase quite a lot, but I think that's the essence.
Well, I can answer. My sort of take on that is we work a lot with our students who are incredible. Incredible insofar as they have good ideas. They can see beyond perhaps the lens of bureaucracy, and they've got fresh ideas, innovation. One of our students has unlocked a potentially huge solution that can solve some of these issues. And working with those students who if you give them the right scope and the right brief and some flexibility to work within that, and the right support, mentoring and kind of guidance, they will deliver strong outcomes. So again, the system supports innovation, strong thinking, robust interrogation, good data to then create a good business case for the outcomes and the solutions that they come up with. And I think that's a lesson for us all, to think about how do we unlock a much more active and dynamic approach rather than being somewhat nascent, passive, whatever type. Our students think out of the box, and then obviously have to be then delivering that in a thesis or in a presentation. Those are little lessons that we can all learn if we scale up and take that knowledge and put it into the right space.
Sterling?
Yes, I mean, two things. One, our students need, as researchers as well, need to spend time with older people, with other people in other industries, secondments, placements. I think that is absolutely critical, and really learning about impact, not just about knowledge generation, but impact and actually how to do some of these things. And what is scalability? As researchers, we never learn about how to scale our research. And I think we need to be rethinking through some of these new skills that we will be needing. And this is just a plug. We've just launched a design and dementia course. So that again is the first of its kind in the UK. And I think we need to be thinking through some of these joint agendas, both environmental and ageing, as huge challenges. Of course, we know climate change and ageing are two of the world's biggest challenges. But we can see this as an opportunity, because housing, for example, is a real opportunity for economic growth. We're not building enough specialist housing for older people. It's an area of growth and opportunity to bring the construction industry in and meets government's agendas of economic growth, productivity, and social care and preventative health. So there's loads of agendas here, but it's not mainstreamed. Governments have not really taken it forward in the way I think they should have done. And I think giving our students exposure to all of that and for them to see the opportunities that can come out of this, out of mission-led work and systems thinking, and can be quite exciting. So I think there's a lot that we can be giving students.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I mean, my experience is that students are brilliant, but they're sponges and they will soak up the ambience of the environment they go into. So if they go straight into a role in leadership or the civil service or town planning, that's whom they will become, because that's the role models they have. If you can employ some of our students before they do that, then they'll go in as difference makers and disruptors, because they know what the genuine challenges are. So I think all of that, they're brilliant to begin with, but they can become quite focused as they progress through their studies. Yeah. The more we can expose them to real challenges, the better. And the more we can expose them to real employment across the industries that they'll then go on to regulate or oversee, the stronger the relationships will be. I'm conscious that we're out of time, and I realise many of these questions have gone unanswered. A few because I think with a last-minute change of panel member, we maybe didn't have the expertise to answer it, but many just because we've run out of time. I really hope that through the rest of the day, we have time to engage with these really fascinating questions and topics, and I'd like to thank both of my panellists, Roddy and Judith, for giving their time and expertise today. Thank you.